After a lot of drama with the new Mirage Orb artifact, they have finally decided to buff it to extreme levels, making it one of the best artifacts in the game once again. And this is going to be very interesting as we're going to go into exactly what happened with this artifact. So the first thing we can see here is that during the night 6 hours ago, we got a update from the developers saying that they have had a lot of problems with this anomaly with this artifact, and now they have decided to basically, if you just look at this, they made the damage. You can see 15 to 3000. It goes from 3000 to 6000. Now the other damage factor for the secondary hit hasn't been changed, meaning that the only thing that seems to really have changed is the main damage that you cast the Mirage Orb. The target that you hit, the damage has been doubled. So it is now a 6000 damage factor total for the first target, with an extra 2000 for both targets, making it a approximately 10,000 damage factor total artifact, which is obviously extremely good and much better than it was intended to be. So for those of you who don't know, what happened with the Mirage Orb is that once it was released at the beginning, it was bugged and the damage that it dealt was incredibly high. It also had another bug that made it so that you could attack with ultimate range, so you could target someone across the map and cast the artifact, and the artifact would travel all the way across. So there was a lot of bugs with this artifact. And when they did fix it, they brought it back to these values, and the people who had invested in this artifact after obviously seeing it do stupid damage were then saying, well, I just invested $10,000 in this artifact Forge of Light event and I got this level 5 artifact, and now you're telling me that it was bugged and now it's nerfed. So obviously a lot of refunds were asked for and a lot of complaints to devs, which is obviously a little bit justified, meaning that people were seeing this artifact hit for 80,000. They're like, well, I want to do that. I'm going to spend my money. And then when they got it, the devs came out and said, oh, actually, it was a bug. Now, this artifact, as intended, you can see here the damage factor is still 3000, so the tooltip hasn't been updated. But I have seen from screenshots of other players that the damage has been updated. They are doing the full damage, meaning that right now it's showing 3000, but this number will be 6000. So all the numbers of the first row will be doubled when it is patched in properly. The rest hasn't changed, so the damage bonus, all that kind of stuff hasn't changed. Now, we did do a video on this artifact before, and even with the values that it has here, it was still a very decent artifact simply because of the 45% damage bonus you can gain from this. So this 7, 9, 11, 13, and 15 basically scales 3 times. The maximum of stacks is 3. So currently at my level, it's 27%, 3 times 9, and then it could go up to 45%. So we have something that does now about 10,000 damage factor, 6,000 plus 2 plus 2, and now 45% more. So we're talking about 14,000 damage factor. And this is now becoming an incredibly powerful artifact. And as it was intended before, it was still a decent artifact, but the numbers were just really low. As we said in the video, compared to Infernal Flames, Infernal Flame was still producing way more damage with this damage factor. Obviously, the damage factor is still pretty low, but for some reason it was doing more damage than the Mirage Orb, even though the damage factors were, there's a bit difference. So this is what kind of like started confusion. Now, first point I want to make is that even though the Mirage Orb is now extremely strong, I don't think it's incredibly broken. I think it's now on the same level as Phoenix Eye, or actually a little bit higher than Phoenix Eye for most situations, but it is still not better than Infernal Flame. The reason being, again, it's the buff. So as I talked about before, of course, at this level I'm getting 18%, and max level it's 30%. You're getting 30% attack for 5 seconds, and this can be triggered every 10 seconds. So this is up basically 50% of the time when you're in combat. This is a passive that's up all the time. So having a 15% attack buff at all time is going to trump no matter how much damage your artifact does, because your magic march scales off of attack, of course, and you will do more normal attack. Your Lilia and Velen and other commanders that are with this march, which is obviously needs to be Lilia and then anybody else, but Lilia Velen being the #1 combo for AoE, well, they will benefit from this on all of their skill casts. There is no cooldown on this other than its own triggering thing. Like, this is up the whole battle. You don't have to press it, you don't have to gain rage. So this is really something that happens and boosts your march at all time. So because of that aspect alone, it is really hard to say that Infernal Flame is going to be ever replaced for Lilia. If you have a Lilia in your march, Infernal Flame is the best on her. Except, of course, if you have a level 1 Infernal Flame, a level 5 Mirage Orb, of course, we could talk about some differences there, but at equal level or close level, Infernal Flame is always going to be better with Lilia. Now, on the other hand, when we're talking about Mirage Orb, now compared to the damage of Phoenix Eye. Like if we look here, Phoenix Eye works a little bit differently than I thought, but the diffuse damage means that every time you have more targets taking damage, the damage is going to be reduced. Now, because we are hitting 5 enemy legions, and when we are hitting 5 enemy legions, basically all of the damage will be reduced by half. So instead of being 4,000 times 5, which is obviously 20,000 damage, well, because it's diffuse, it will be 50% on all the hits, because 15,000 times 4 times 5, it is higher than 50. So basically you need to hit, I think, 3 targets so that you get only 45% damage reduction. And then if you hit only 2 targets, well, then they have 30% damage reduction. And then if you only hit 1 target, well, then they take the full 4,000 damage. So this artifact has a lot of downfall for that aspect, but still at the max level, you're still doing, 2,000 damage on 5 targets. So it's still a 10,000 damage factor. But as we said, with the Mirage Orb, with its buff, we're at about 14.5 thousand. So in all aspect, if you're hitting maximum amount of targets with both artifacts, you will do way better with the Mirage Orb, now that it has been buffed so much. Because if you look at the Mirage Orb's own activation here, the diffuse damage does not apply to the first target. So deals damage and then knock to enemy and deals diffuse damage to them. So the first damage isn't diffused. So you're only getting the minus 15% basically from this. So if you hit only 1 extra enemy, there is no malus. You're going to get the full 2,000. If you're going to be hitting 2 extra enemies, well, then they are going to be reduced by 15% each. So it's about 1,700, meaning that it's still going to be. Now, to demonstrate my point, here's a little bit of math that I did. So the Mirage Orb is now going to be at max level. Of course, this is taking everything at max level to make it easier. 6,000 damage plus 2,000 plus 2,000. Now these are going to be reduced by 15%. So 1717, we're at about 8,400 damage. And if you get the 45% damage buff, which you get very easily with Tia in your March or Bertrand in your March, well, you're at 12,180 damage. So this is about the damage that you're going to be dealing in a situation where you're hitting as many targets as you can, which is 3 targets, and you have the maximum amount of buffs and you're using the right March. Phoenix Eye, on the other hand, has 4,000 damage factor and times 5 targets. So the diffuse damage is making it 50% reduced because there's more than 4 targets. So 15, 15, 15, that's 45. Another 15, that's 60. It's capped at 50. So it's going to be 50 for everything. So we're talking about a 10,000 damage factor here. So, the difference is 12,000 or 10,000. It's not humongous, but it is there. So it makes Mirage Orb the better artifact now that it was buffed. And because the scaling on the skill is so high, the 6,000 damage, it is a higher scaling than we've seen before on any artifact. The only one that's comparable is the gold crest from the archers, who do extreme amount of high amount damage. So now we have such a high base value of damage that you are going to be seeing very, very high numbers for that reason. And this is why people are going to be loving Mirage Orb. Of course, the higher level, the better it is, but still, the difference here where it can change a little bit will be if, for example, you are going to be hitting only 1 or 2 targets. Well, your Mirage Orb is still going to do 6,000 times 25% on the 1 target you're hitting. So we're still talking about almost 9,000 damage. It's still very, very strong. Phoenix Eye on 1 target will do 4,000. On 2 target, it will be 4,000 minus 15%. So we're talking about like 6,000-7,000 something. So still decent, but of course, the more targets you hit, the more diffuse it is. So Phoenix Eye is still always going to be very good, but the difference between hitting 2 or 3 targets and hitting 5, there isn't much. You're doing almost as much damage by hitting 2 targets than you are by hitting 5. So the diffuse damage does hurt Phoenix Eye quite a lot in this aspect. Now, that doesn't mean that the Mirage Orb is better than Phoenix Eye for all marches, because as we just saw with the numbers, the reason Mirage Orb is so much better right now with the buffs is that you have this additional effect. Every time your Legion gains a buff effect through a hero skill, they deal more damage, up to a maximum of 27 for me, 45% if you have maxed out, meaning that you do need a march that gains buffs, and it needs to be buffs that are gained through hero skill, not through talent. So as I've tested on my Mirage Orb video, you can check it out if you're interested. It'll be down below in the description as well. This is only something that works on heroes such as, for example, Tia, because for Tia's skill here, when she casts this rage skill, she also gains synergy. Synergy is a buff, and that is what will be giving you a stack. The other stuff that she gives are not considered buffs, so this is the only way you're gonna get the buff for the artifact for Tia March. And Bertrand's compound interest also is a buff considered by the artifact, so you are going to be gaining this quite a few times. But out of all the other mages, no one has a buff in their kit. So if you are using Mirage Orb, you are going to need Bertrand or Tia. It's better with Bertrand because you're going to get the buff right away. But if you're going to be using Tia, that means you need to cast 3 rage kills on her before your artifact is max buff for the full 45% damage, which doesn't take that long, to be honest, to cast 3 rage kills in combat. It's about, 6-7 seconds between rage kills at the peak of combat, up to 10 seconds sometimes. So it's really not that hard to do, but it's just something to keep in mind because yes, Mirage Orb is really good, but only if you're using it on marches like Bertrand and Tia, because otherwise you're not going to gain the buffs, and then the damage factor becomes only this, 6,000 plus 2,000, which is still good, but then it becomes lower damage than Phoenix Eye, and is just, a comparative artifact, still as good, just, not the same, not the overpowered damage you're going to see from this. But this is just a little video kind of to recap what happened and talk about the current state of this artifact. Now, obviously, it's too late for the Forge of Light, so if you don't have it, you can't do anything about it. But as it stands right now, I think this Mirage Orb has become one of the best artifacts. If you are going to be using Bertrand, especially if you've maxed out Bertrand or leveled up Bertrand, to a point where you want to use him, or of course this artifact is made for him, it is going to be the best artifact for him. And then the stun that it applies, of course, we haven't talked about that, but that's another utility. So it's really a good artifact, there is no question about this, and it is in my opinion the second best mage artifact right now, after obviously Infernal Flame for Lilia, and then this is for Bertrand. And then if you have any other mage march that are not Bertrand or Lilia, well, you can use these artifacts still, but then Phoenix Eye is the one that will be more of the one that can be used on anybody. So this is what I'm doing myself. My Lilia march, which is going to be with a secondary of Tia or a secondary of Velen, is going to be having the Infernal Flame. And then my second march, which is going to be Bertrand Tia most of the time, well, it is going to be using the Mirage Orb. And then my Waldir, who is going to be with Velen most of the time, is going to be having the Phoenix Eye, because that march can't use the other artifacts as well. So in this case, when I'm running 3 mage marches, Waldir is with Velen, and my Bertrand has to be stuck with Tohar, which is a 5/1/1, eventually 1. So anyway, it is the only real use that he has for now, is to make Bertrand shine. So that is what I'm going to be using him for. But if I'm running 2 mage marches, then it's not going to see light of day. And sadly, in this situation, my Phoenix Eye would basically not see a lot of action, because now that I have a Mirage Orb, it's going to be a hard artifact to replace on a Bertrand march. But because my Phoenix Eye is level 5 and my Mirage Orb is level 2, obviously Phoenix Eye could still bring more damage, but for all the utility of the knocking that this brings, it also is a very fun artifact to use. So it gives you a lot of more options as mages, and of course there's also the Breath of Jargantis for those who want to help debuff the enemies. So there's a lot of mage options. Now we just need them to hopefully fix a little bit of Bertrand and Tohar eventually, if it's fixable. But it would be really nice if Bertrand was fixed with this talent, making his compound interest work as it was meant to be from what the dev said to us before. But in any case, it's still going to be very interesting, and Mirage Orb is definitely gone up a grade in terms of really good artifacts. We'll have to see exactly what it looks like. We have a lot of war coming in the next few weeks, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned. There's going to be a lot of war videos and clips from TFS against EIS and BXS, as well as our ally EXGs. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to see a lot of Mirage Orb in action. So make sure to stay tuned for that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.